My name is Jack Tripp, and I'm the county chaplain for Sussex County. Tonight is our third annual Sussex County's memorial service to the 4 chaplains, and it just coincidentally happens to be the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the Dorchester. So it's kind of an important night. The Dorchester, of course, was sunk on February 3rd, 1943. But it's close enough that we can round up and say it's 75 years. So, brotherhood has nothing to do with the similarities between men. Even among twins, no two brothers are exactly alike. These differences can create challenges to family harmony, incite jealousy, and lead to sibling rivalries. At the same time, it is these differences that make a family stronger, better rounded, and best equipped to face the challenges of life. In time of crises, when a family pulls together, these differences make it possible to approach a problem from different perspectives and find solutions for the common good. There is strength in diversity, and perhaps a family should rejoice more in the differences between brothers and sisters than in the things that they share in common. In November 1942, 4 young men found each other while attending chaplain school at Harvard University. They had enough in common to bond them together. At age 42, George Fox was the older brother. The youngest was 30-year-old Clark Poling, and less than 3 years separated him from the other 2, Alexander Good and John Washington. A common cause brought them together, the desire to render service to their nation during the critical years of World War II. Between the early days of May and late July, the 4 had entered military service from different areas of the country. Reverend Fox enlisted in the Army from Vermont. The same day, his 18-year-old son, Wyatt, enlisted in the Marine Corps. During World War I, though, only 17 years old, Fox had convinced the Army he was actually 18 and enlisted as a medical corps assistant. His courage on the battlefield earned him the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. When World War II broke out, he said, "I've got to go. I know from experience what our boys are about to face. They need me." This time, however, he didn't enlist to heal the wounds of the body. As a minister, he was joining the chaplain corps to heal the wounds of the soul. Reverend Clark V. Poling was from Ohio and pastoring in New York when World War II threatened world freedom. He determined to enter the Army, but not as a chaplain. I'm not going to hide behind the church in some safe office out of the firing line, he told his father when he was informed of his plans to serve his country. His father, Reverend Daniel Poling, knew something of war, having served as a chaplain himself during World War I. He told his son, "Don't you know that chaplains have the highest mortality rate of all? As a chaplain, you have the best chance in the world to be killed. You just can't carry a gun to kill anyone yourself." With new appreciation for the role in the chaplain's corps, Clark Poling accepted a commission and followed in his father's footsteps. Like Clark Poling, Alexander Good had followed the same steps of his own father in the ministry. His first years of service were in Marion, Indiana. Then he moved on to York, Pennsylvania. While studying and preparing to minister to the needs of others, Alex had joined the National Guard. 10 months before Pearl Harbor, he sought an assignment in the Navy Chaplain Corps, but wasn't initially accepted. When war was declared, he wanted more than ever to serve the needs of those who went in harm's way to defend freedom and human dignity. He chose to do so as a United States Army chaplain. One look at the bespectacled, mild-mannered John P. Washington, you would have left one with the impression that he was not the sort of man to go to war and become a hero. His love of music and beautiful voice belied the toughness inside. One of 9 children in an Irish immigrant family living in the toughest section of Newark, New Jersey, he had learned through sheer determination to hold on to his own in a fight. By the time he was a teenager, he was the leader of the South 12th Street Gang. Then God called him to the ministry, returning him to the streets of New Jersey in organized sports teams. He organized sports teams. Play ball with young boys who needed a strong friend to look up to and inspire others with his beautiful hymns of praise and thanksgiving. Upon meeting at the chaplain school, the 4 men quickly became friends. One of Clark Poling's cousins, and that would be David Poling, later said they were all very sociable guys who seemed to have initiated interfaith activities even before the war. They hit it off well at chaplain school, sharing their faith, not just a first-time deal for them. They were really very close. They had prayed together a number of times before the final crises. The observation pointed out by Clark's cousin is of note, for the men of whom he spoke were unique. Their close bond might easily have marked them as the 4 chaplains, long before that fateful night 3 months after they first met. When their actions would forever make the titles synonymous with the names of George L. Fox, Alex D. Good, Clark V. Poling, and John P. Washington. The difference in their backgrounds and personalities could have been easily outweighed by the common calling to ministry, had it not been for one major difference. In a world where differences have all too often created conflict and separated brothers, the 4 chaplains found a special kind of unity, and in that unity, they found strength. Despite the differences, they became brothers, for they had one unique characteristic in common that overshadowed everything else. They were brothers because all four shared the same Father. Scouts, advance the colors. Jesse Germano will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now, you were all handed a program, and on the back you have the words to America the Beautiful. So at this time, if you will join me in singing America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of rain, for purple mountains, majesties, above the fruited plain. America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful, for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful, for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, thy alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Please be seated. Father Benjamin Williams will offer the invocation.
Heavenly Father, we stand on the shoulders of those gallant men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice to keep our nation free. Lest we ever forget that freedom comes at a very dear price. We ask you, Lord, to give us the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to always remember and honor all those who came before, all those who gave the ultimate sacrifice on fields of battle throughout this world. May we also give them honor by keeping their memory alive always, by teaching our children the values that formed this union over 200 years ago, by telling the stories of those gallant men and women who allowed us to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. And let us never become complacent, for freedom is never free. And those who are not ready, or those who repeat errors of the past, may find themselves once again on the field of battle, lest we remain vigilant. We pray, Father, that this world will never know world war again. We ask that you give us the strength and courage and clear vision to keep our nation free and to work for international peace so that all peoples, no matter where they live, no matter what continent in which they reside, will live in peace and harmony. God willing, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Cover. I have the privilege of introducing two guests. The first guest is Pastor Voigt from the Prince of Peace Lutheran Church. And he's going to tell us about the connection that his family has with the Dorchester. Pastor. It's really by a strange set of circumstances that I'm here. I met Jack when he was at our church for the YMCA stuff while they were doing a renovation. And I don't even know how we got to talking about this. I don't really remember. I don't deserve to be here. This is really my wife's side of the family. This is her story. We're kind of an oddball couple too, to be honest with you. You've got to understand that Lutherans are a peculiar branch of Christianity all by themselves. But her side of the family is that Scandinavian Lutheran branch, the liberal side of the Lutheran tree. And mine is the German side. And her family's been in this country a lot longer than mine, at least since the First World War. My dad only got here in 1949. So you can kind of understand the dynamics going on here. And, you know, when I came to meet her family, my mother-in-law's looking me over like you couldn't find a good Scandinavian Lutheran boy to bring home? And you know, the dynamics of the Dorchester are such that, you know, a lot of these people that were on that boat, for one reason or another, were not military, you know, maybe age or something, but they felt compelled to serve, to do something to help with the effort. And after Jack loaned me the book and I read it, they knew exactly what they were getting into, that they were going through enemy-infested waters on the way to Greenland to build a base. And those were my, let's see, Arthur is my wife's grandfather. She never met him. And he was killed aboard the Dorchester when my mother-in-law was about 12. And so she grew up without any siblings, with a mother,
who constantly reminded her about her hero father who died on the way to Greenland. And those are hard steps. Those are hard footsteps to follow. So that's our story. And as time went on, eventually we always heard about this. They never mentioned the Dorchester. I don't think she remembered the name anymore. But certainly the ship of the four chaplains I heard about early on, and every so often thereafter. And being the good German Lutheran that I am, I let it go in one ear and out the other. And I tried not to take any of the comments personally. But as I said, you loaned me the book, and then I kind of got much more in tune with what an important event this was. And so I'm honored to be here, if only just to represent my wife's part of the family and some of the suffering that they were involved in during the war. Here she comes. This is my lovely. Come on in, have a seat. I'm trying to tell your story. So anyway, my wife's grandfather was Arthur Shea Stray. He was born around 1904. I don't know how old he was when the ship went down. It was right around his birthday. 39. Yeah. So, thank you. I'm not a mathematician, I'm a theologian. He gave his life. And that is something that we never forgot. And my mother-in-law, I can tell you, certainly never, ever forgot either. That was just something that stamped itself on her personality forever. And so we do remember him. And just recently, in all of these years, we finally got in touch with my sister-in-law, Bonnie, who has apparently a lot of stuff locked up in her attic. She found a photograph. So after all this time, Karen finally has a photograph of her grandfather after all of these years. So that's how that works. I don't know really much more than I can tell you about this event. I can tell you that when she passed away, I was her favorite son, my mother-in-law's favorite son. So good things do happen. And my mother-in-law, God bless her soul, never. She learned to live nicely with my dad. Let's put it that way. There was never any strife between them. But I'm sure she was gritting her teeth every time she heard him say chicken, because my father could never say that word without a really good, strong German accent. So, but this is America, and that's what we are about. We learn to live together as best as we can, and sometimes we have our opinions that we share or don't share. We live with them, if they become our burden. But it's a wonderful thing, and I'm glad to be able to celebrate this occasion with all of you. And it's an amazing thing that here, up in the northwest woods of New Jersey, over all my sisters-in-laws, we're the ones that are remembering this particular event. Your mother would have loved to, maybe. She really would. So, thank you.
The book that the pastor was saying that I gave him to read is the book called No Greater Glory. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Dorchester, grab a copy and read. And the second guest I would like to introduce is Reverend Randolph Parks, who will tell us or give us information as to what his family has done to honor the four chaplains. Reverend?
It's an honor to be with you all tonight. Thank you for this opportunity. And I am grateful to have gotten to know Chaplain Jack Tripp over the past several years, and for the honor of Chaplain Jack bringing some, maybe even some of you, but some veterans and people of military honor to our hospital on various occasions. So thank you for inviting me this night. It's so wonderful to hear the story of your mother and the connection of the Dorchester. Thank you so much. The hearing of the 4 chaplains is something I grew up with, though it was vague. It was something I continually heard about the 4 chaplains. My father, Chaplain Lewis B. Parks, was United States Army chaplain in World War II, and was quite a bit older than me. He was 45 when I was born. And I just remember hearing through the years as a child about the 4 chaplains who gave their life on the Dorchester. And didn't put a lot together as a little boy. It was only through asking later in life that my father would open up and share a little bit more about those things. He told nothing much about the war during my childhood. But when I was older, I heard more about this story. And where it culminated, I believe, in really coming to understand it was as a young adult. My father, who was an Army chaplain and then gave, I guess, 30 years in the reserve after World War II and maybe 40 years as a VA hospital chaplain, was dedicating a window at the chapel of the VA hospital in Kerrville, Texas, where he retired. And that stained glass window that they bought to honor that chapel was a picture, a painting, if you will, of the 4 chaplains. And that's where my father unfolded the story more to myself. And the sacrifice that I heard has had a powerful impact just in about people who gave themselves selflessly. And I guess because my father was a chaplain, it meant a lot more to me knowing that he had been in that step. He'd walked in those steps. He himself had been injured in trying to get men off the battlefield. And I gained a little bit more about the self-sacrifice of men and women in the military, of chaplains in particular, and then something Chaplain Jack shared. The 4 different chaplains coming from different religious backgrounds. It was a milieu that I grew up in, as my dad was known as a Protestant chaplain, but the world of chaplaincy that he grew up, that he lived in, was passed on to me a world of sharing brotherhood beyond one's own sectarian beliefs. He was a man of all men, and I'm about to tear up because he died about 5 years ago. But he's passed that on to me, that we live in a world with many differences, but we share one Creator, and we work in a world for better ideals, not always with people of our same background, but we can work together for the common good of humanity. And so thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share my memories and to remember specifically the stories my father passed on about these 4 heroes. Thank you.
Robert Caggiano will now read a very unique prayer.
God of our fathers and our God, we thank you for the unity that the USAT Dorchester chaplains, these 4 men of God, demonstrated in life and in death. Unity that is not uniformity. Unity that strengthens within each of us every worthy loyalty of faith and practice. Unity that transcends all our differences and makes us one in loyalty to our country and our fellow man and to you, our God. Grant us now your abiding presence, and may we remain faithful to the spirit of our 4 chaplains who, having learned to live and serve together in death, were not divided. Cover.
At this time, it is my honor to introduce the post commander, Bob Glesius.
Good evening. I would just like to thank everybody that came out this evening to pay tribute and honor to these four great men, four very great religious men who put themselves way ahead of the needs of others. The sacrifice they gave, many others survived that tragic day. Again, I would like to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from the four chaplains themselves. And I'm going to ask for George L. Fox to come up and read his bio.
I was the oldest of four chaplains. Born at the turn of the century in Altoona, Pennsylvania, I was a bright schoolboy who enjoyed reading and was particularly fond of Abraham Lincoln. As a teenager, I developed an interest in religion and began studying the Bible on my own. I had an independent streak and did not want to become a farmer like my father. In 1917, during World War I, I lied about my age and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps as a medical corps assistant and trained to be an ambulance driver. I served on the Western Front in Europe and won a Silver Star for rescuing a wounded soldier from a battlefield filled with poison gas, although I myself had no gas mask. I won the Cross de Guerre for outstanding bravery during an artillery barrage and spent many months in the hospital with a broken back. I also received the Purple Heart. After the war, I attended Moody Institute in Chicago, where I met my future wife, Isadora Holbert, from Vermont. We married and had 2 children. We settled in Vermont, where I worked as a public accountant and built a successful practice. One evening, however, I came home from work and told my wife I wanted to study the ministry. She readily approved. I then attended Boston University School of Theology and graduated in June 1934. I then served as pastor at Watts River Union and Gilman in Vermont. I was fondly nicknamed the Little Minister because I was only 5 feet 7 inches tall. I became active in the American Legion's Veterans Organization and was particularly interested in hospital work and child welfare. Because of my outstanding service, I was appointed department chaplain for the state of Vermont for several years. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, I told my wife, I've got to go. I know from experience that our boys are about to face what our boys are about to face. They need me. I enlisted in the United States Army and attended chaplain school at Harvard University, where I met and befriended Rabbi Alex Good. I served with the 411th Coast Artillery at Camp Davis, then at Camp Miles Standish in Massachusetts. Prior to being sent to Camp Taunton in Greenland via the USAT Dorchester. Before I boarded the Dorchester, I wrote a letter to my little daughter. I want you to know how proud I am of your marks, that your marks in school are so high. I always remember that kindness and charity and courtesy are much more important. His daughter received the letter after the news had reached that the ship had been torpedoed. Thank you.
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Rabbi and Mrs. Good, the oldest of 3 boys and 1 girl. My family moved to Washington, D.C. when I was a boy. I was a brilliant student who was always seen with at least 1 book in his hands. I had participated particular interest in the United States Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, along with fondness for mathematics, mechanics, and oration. I attended Eastern High School in Washington, D.C., where I received sports medals for tennis, swimming, and track. After World War I, when the body of the unknown soldier was brought to nearby Arlington Cemetery, I attended the ceremonies, but rather than taking a bus or a family car to the cemetery, I chose to walk the entire distance from my home, 30 miles round trip, as a show of respect. I later joined the National Guard and kept an active membership while training to follow in my father's footsteps and become a rabbi. I married my childhood sweetheart, Teresa. We had a daughter which broke the long string of firstborn boys in the family. I became acquainted with one of the leaders of the Reformed Rabbinate, Rabbi Simon, who persuaded me to attend the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew Union College. I received my first rabbinical appointment at Temple Beth Israel in York, Pennsylvania. Remarkably, I said I would know better how to heal men's souls if I knew how to heal their bodies as well. So I decided to pursue a medical degree at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and drove there every day, 45 miles, while also performing my rabbinical duties. I joined the YMCA and became interested in the interfaith movement. In York, Pennsylvania, I worked with the superintendent of primary education to form a practical plan of human relations education to eradicate segregation and bias in the York schools. The plan was later adopted for the entire state of Pennsylvania. I paid close attention to the news from Europe concerning Hitler and expansion of the Nazi Reich. I became involved in the American movement to aid Britain. I also tried to enlist in the United States Navy as a chaplain, but was turned down due to lack of vacancies. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, I applied to the United States Army and was accepted. I was sent to the Chaplains Training School at Harvard, where I met Reverend George Fox. I was assigned to the Army Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina, but was quite unhappy there. I wanted frontline overseas duty to be near the men who needed me most. I pulled many political strings to get sent to Europe. I was first sent to Camp Miles Standish in Taunton, Massachusetts, a port of embarkation. At the camp, I was reunited with Reverend George Fox and also befriended Chaplain Clark Poling and Father John Washington. One day in 1943, I sent a telegram to my wife, having a wonderful experience. And she knew then that I had found warm companionship and fellowship among men who could share my faith and my laughter. And now I call on Clark Poling.
I was the youngest of the 4 chaplains. Born in Columbus, Ohio, I had a sister and a brother. While we were young, my family moved to Auburndale, Massachusetts, where we attended public school. When I was young, I was a charming but mischievous boy who endeared myself to my teachers. During World War I wrote my very first letter in square block printing. It was received by my father, Reverend Dr. Poling, in a dugout on the Western Front in Europe. The letter read, "Dear Daddy, gee, I wish I was where you are. Love, Clark." My family summered in Marshfield, Massachusetts, at our cottage, and we enjoyed many good times at the beach. However, illness struck my family and my mother passed away. My sickly father moved our family to my grandparents in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. A year later, we moved back to Boston. My father then married a widow who had 2 daughters. We lived in Long Island, New York, before finally settling in Lake Sunapee, New Hampshire. As a teenager, I attended Oakwood, a Quaker school in Poughkeepsie, New York, where I formed several lifelong friendships. After graduation, I attended Hope College in Holland, Michigan, a school of the Dutch Reformed religious tradition. During my second year, I decided to become a minister and would thus become the 7th generation in an unbroken line of ministries in my family. However, I disagreed with some of the college's policies and I decided to leave, finishing my studies at Rutgers University in New Jersey. I then went on to study at Yale Divinity School, and after serving student escorts in Meriden and New London, Connecticut, I became pastor of the First Reformed Church in Schenectady, New York. I fell in love with and married Betty Young from Philadelphia. We had a son called Porky. We later had a little girl born after the Dorchester went down. Following Pearl Harbor, I felt that I should go to war, but I was undecided whether to serve as a soldier or as a chaplain. I decided to be a chaplain. I received basic training at Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I served as a chaplain at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and then was sent to Camp Miles Standish in Massachusetts prior to being sent on to my next assignment in Greenland. I paid what turned out to be a final visit to my family and congregation at home before embarking aboard the Dorchester. Alone with my father in Dr. Poland's study, I turned and said, "Dad, I know how much confidence that I have in your prayers, but I don't want you to pray for my safe return. That wouldn't be fair. Many will not return, and to ask God for special family favors wouldn't be fair. No, Dad, don't pray for my safe return. Just pray that I shall do my duty and something more. Pray that I shall never be a coward. Pray that I should have the strength and courage and understanding of men, and especially pray that I shall be patient. Just pray that I shall be adequate." As a chaplain, I taught my men not to bear personal hatred for the German or the Japanese soldiers or civilians. My instructions were simple. Hate the system that made your brother evil. It is the system we must destroy.
And finally, we need to hear from John P. Washington.
I was born in Newark, New Jersey, the son of poor Irish immigrants. I was the oldest of 5 boys and 2 girls. I had my father's grin and my mother's stoic determination. I sold newspapers to bring home extra money to help feed 9 mouths in the family. I also loved music and sang in the church choir. But I was also a mischievous boy. I liked to fight and could be seen occasionally sporting a black eye or bloody nose. One day, while playing with a friend, I suffered a mishap. A BB gun they were fooling around with accidentally went off and struck me in the eye. It healed, but forced the lifelong wearing of glasses. I became an altar boy in the 6th grade, and over the next few years began to believe that God was calling me to the priesthood. I shared my feelings with my parents and the nuns at parochial school, but was careful not to tell anybody else. None of my boyhood friends ever suspected that I might want to be a priest due to my ever-present sense of humor and sometimes salty language. I was even the one-time leader of the South 12th Street Boys in Newark. I became quite ill at one point and was even given the last rites of the Catholic Church. I recovered, and as a result became a much more prayerful and kinder young man. I attended Seton Hall in Orange, New Jersey, for both high school and college. When I finally broke the news of my intention to become a priest, no one believed me at first. I then attended seminary school at Darlington and was ordained in June 1935. I said my first Mass at my old home parish at St. Rose's in Newark. I was assigned to St. Genevieve's in Elizabeth, New Jersey, followed by assignments in St. Venetius in Orange and St. Stephen's in Arlington, New Jersey. As a priest, I was still one of the boys. I played ball with the kids in the street and also organized parish baseball and football teams along with glee clubs. After Pearl Harbor, most of the young folks had known me and we had gone off to war. I wanted to go right along with them. I tried to enlist in the United States Navy, but was rejected due to my poor eyesight. I applied to the United States Army and was accepted after a long wait. I received basic training at Fort Benjamin Harrison, then received orders for Greenland. Before I embarked, I felt the need to visit my family and friends to receive their prayers and blessings. The last words I spoke to my mother on leaving were, "Goodbye, Mom. No crying. You'll be hearing from me."
It was known as Torpedo Junction, the U-boat infested icy waters of the North Atlantic during World War II. On January 23, 1943, the United States Army Transport Dorchester, an old coastal steamer, quickly pressed into military service, left New York Harbor bound for Greenland. The USAT Dorchester was escorted by 3 Coast Guard cutters. 2 patrolled the flanks, the Escapana and the Comanche, and the 3rd, the Tampa, was 3,000 yards out front. Most of the men were seasick with green with nausea. The weather was bitterly cold with gale-force winds. Ice began building up on the deck, slowing the USAT Dorchester to 10 knots. Moving among them were 4 Army chaplains, George Fox, Alexander Good, Clark Poling, and John Washington. The chaplains talked with and listened to the men, soothing apprehensions, offering encouragement, sharing jokes. By their concern and their camaraderie with the men and one another, they brought solace. On February 2, 1943, the Tampa sonar detected the presence of a submarine. She dropped back and swept the periphery of the convoy, but failed to find the submarine's position. That evening, the Tampa returned to the patrol area up front, and the other ships followed. The captain ordered the men to sleep in their clothing, with life jackets close at hand. They were only 150 miles from Greenland, when with daylight, there would be air cover from the American base. It was just after midnight on February 3rd, 1943, and the enemy submarine fired a torpedo towards the United States Army Transport Dorchester, aging flank. The missile exploded in the boiler room, destroying the electric supply and releasing suffocating clouds of steam and ammonia gas. Many on board died instantly. Some were trapped below deck. Others jolted from their bunks, grouped and stumbled their way to the decks of the stricken vessel. Taking on water rapidly, the ship began listing to starboard. Overcrowded lifeboats capsized, rafts drifted away before anyone could reach them. Men clung to the rails, frozen with fear, unable to let go and plunge into the dark, churning waters far below. The testimony of survivors tells us that the sole order and the only fragment of hope in this chaos came from the 4 chaplains, who calmly guided men to their boat stations. They opened the storage locker and distributed life jackets. Then they coaxed men frozen with fear over the side. Soon the supply of life jackets was exhausted. Several survivors report watching in awe as the 4 chaplains either gave away or forced upon other young men their own life jackets. These 4 men of God had given away their only means of saving themselves in order to save others. The chaplains gathered together and led the men around them in prayer and a hymn. They linked their arms together as the slant of the deck became severe. And just that way, with their arms linked in brotherhood and their heads bowed in prayer, they sank beneath the waves. It was a heroic act. It was not the only heroic act aboard the United States Army Transport Dorchester, but was especially significant because of the identity of these 4 young men. 2 Protestants, a Catholic, and a Jew. Today, as it has been many years, the chapel of the 4 chaplains serves the memory of these brave men and carries their message of interfaith cooperation and selflessness service to every part of the nation. At 1:35 a.m., 15 minutes after the Dorchester plunged into the depths, Teresa Good, asleep in the home of her in-laws in Washington, D.C., while her own house was being refurbished, awoke with a start. It was as if someone had dropped me in ice water and I was just frozen, she would say. It seemed to me that the whole room had become illuminated, and Alex's picture on the dresser just seemed to glow. I felt as if he was trying to reach me. I was just so frightened. The last message Teresa had received from her husband was a cable apparently sent from St. John's. But since there had been no word, Teresa remembered her premonition. Had Alex been trying to reach her, perhaps to say goodbye? Was this God's way of telling her? On February 13, 1943, Isadore Fox and her niece were at home recording funny stories that were to be sent to George to cheer him up. But these stories would never reach him. Before the record was completed, there was a knock on the door, and Isadore, answering it, was handed a telegram that bore that dreadful message: "We regret to inform you." In shock, she collapsed on the bed. She had just received a letter from him, apparently delayed, saying, "I am feeling fine, in case you were wondering. I know you were anxious to hear from me. I haven't a trace of a cold any longer, and am seldom bothered with anything else. Many men come for counsel. This is the reason I am here. I am glad." Isadore was sure he was trying to tell her that he had arrived at his destination. She wrote to the War Department official that she felt deep within her heart as though a voice was saying, "On land, on land, on land." And I have not ceased to hear those same words, also the words "safe and well," time and again. I cannot doubt but God has spoken to me. I beg you in the name of my husband and in the name of the eternal God and Heavenly Father to see to it that the War Department make a further search for my husband to ascertain if he may not possibly be a German prisoner or on some island in confinement where he cannot write or get word to me. Finally, Isadore had to accept the reality that George was not hiding behind someone this time, waiting to fling himself into her arms. Her Methodist minister came over and tried to comfort her, telling her that she should be very proud of George, whom the newspapers were calling a great hero. "I do not want a hero," Isadore sobbed. "I want my husband. I always knew he was a hero. The way he worked in those small churches and never complained, even when the pay was so small he could not get proper food for his children." Isadore later wrote that she did not want to live without George. When friends and relatives reminded her that her children needed her, she replied, "Although I love my children dearly, with George gone, there seems to be a gap of 1,000,000 miles between the children and me." She never realized it so clearly that he was nearly my whole life. I felt only a shadow without him. A letter from her son, Wyatt, however, offered her some solace. He wrote, "I've just got to be the kind of man my father was." Wyatt surely realized how happy his father would have been to hear these words. Words George never able to utter as a boy in his earlier wretched life. As for George's daughter, Mary, she would treasure the last words he wrote her. I want you to know how proud I am of you. that your marks in school are so high, but also remember that kindness and charity and courtesy are much more important. Isadore would now do what she knew her husband would want her to do. She took special courses at Boston University School of Theology, and in 1955 became an ordained minister. She was appointed to several parishes in New Hampshire and Vermont, and served as chaplain of the American Legion Auxiliary in Vermont. I have never felt, she said, that I am carrying on George's work. His work never left off, and his spirit continues in the lives of the thousands he has inspired. But I do feel that I am doing good, and that he is pleased and proud. Since World War II, numerous honors have been posthumously conferred upon the four chaplains. In 1961, a unique specially designed Congressional Medal of Valor, equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor, was awarded to each of them. Early in 1944, the chaplains had been awarded the Purple Heart and Distinguished Service Cross, and the medals were given to Teresa Good, Isadore Fox, Betty Poling, and Anna Schwobel, John Washington's sister. Mary Washington's John's mother sent her regrets to the War Department, explaining that she could not attend, as I have not left my home for any affairs since hearing of my son's death. And incidentally, she did not only lose John, but she lost 2 other sons in World War II. So her actions are kind of justified as a mother. Although no postage stamp memorializing an individual, except for a U.S. president, can normally be issued until 10 years after the person's death, a congressional waiver on the limitations permitted the issue of a 1948 3-cent stamp with the heading, "These are mortal chaplains," and an illustration of the 4 men above the sinking ship. And in 1998, Senators Orrin Hatch and Red Grahams pushed through the Senate a unanimous resolution concurred in the House to designate February 3rd as Four Chaplains Day. Legislation in some states have passed similar resolutions. Other honors, too, have been heaped upon the four heroes, with monuments to them springing up in many cities and towns. The Pentagon and the Washington National Cathedral each have a stained glass window featuring the chaplains. A wax tableau depicting their last minutes aboard the Dorchester have been featured in the National Historical Wax Museum at the Capitol. A fountain dedicated to them spouts water in the National Memorial Cemetery outside the city. A Four Chaplains Memorial Viaduct, a major flood control project, is the pride of Massillon, Ohio. A public school has been named for Alex Good in York, Pennsylvania, where he presided as a rabbi. In the lobby of the school, a ceramic tile mural bears the likeness of all four chaplains with an identical inscription from Malachi 2:10. Under each in Hebrew, the Good, in Latin for Washington, and in English, Fox and Poling. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother? By profaning the covenant of our Father. And I should point out that the public school in York, Pennsylvania, that's named after Alex Good, holds a breakfast meeting on the anniversary, or as close to the anniversary, in remembrance of the four chaplains. And finally, the military survivors. Michael Warish returned home with 90% disability pay, but decided to remain in the Army, although he suffered almost constant pain in his arms, legs, and shoulders. His mind was also affected. He was sometimes unable to separate fantasy from reality, thinking as he did in the water that he was no longer alive. He nevertheless rose to the rank of Sergeant Major and was advisor to the National Guard, retiring from the Army in 1963. At last he could relax with his wife and 6 children. But in 2002, misfortune struck again when he was injured in a car crash and he could move around only with a walker. His hands, which were once almost frozen, now had no feeling at all, and he could not even hold a fork. Michael was comforted, however, by the love and attention of his family, and also by the spiritual strength that stemmed from his experience with the 4 chaplains. His thoughts of them often, especially of that moment, he thought of them often, especially of that moment when he had seen them join in common prayer as the Dorchester was going down. They showed him the true meaning of what God stands for in whatever form he is seen. Maybe he would see them again in heaven, when at times he still thought he was. In September 2003, fantasy became reality as Michael Warish has joined his heroes. At this time, as we conclude this meeting of the 4 chaplains, we bow our heads in remembrance of these heroes who showed the world what true brotherhood is all about. And as we leave here tonight, may we leave with the spirit of the 4 chaplains and carry on their work. Amen.
Amen.
And now I will call, Okay, if everyone will stand for taps. Scouts, retire the colors. This concludes the ceremony, and if you go downstairs, we are serving cake and coffee. Thank you.
Thank you.